guys, so this video is going to be my top 5 favorite podcasts. So I've been obsessed with listening to podcasts in the past year, I would say. I've listened to a lot and I feel like I really found my favorites, like my go-to. I am still open to finding a lot of new ones, and I will listen to, I will give anything a try, but I feel like these top 5 that I'm going to talk about today are my number one, my go-tos, and mainly they are true crime podcasts because that's my favorite. That's what I like the most. I also have a few Disney ones on here, but I love true crime podcasts. So if you're not a true crime fan, still listen anyway because I have others that I'm going to mention, but just know that the true crime ones are my number ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from 5 to 1, and I'm just going to mention each one and why I like them. I will leave the names of them all down below, so just in case that you missed it and you want to listen to it, you want to give it a try, the names will be down below for these podcasts. And I listen on the Apple app that came on my phone, but most of these I believe are also on like Spotify, and there's other ways to listen to them, so if you Google it, I'm sure you can find on how to listen to these. So my number 5 pick for my favorite podcast is one that's called The Disney Dish, and this one is basically just a podcast about Disney news, and I feel like it's focused on Disney World, but they also talk about like Disneyland, and they've mentioned Aulani, and they also talk about just general Disney news, and I really like it because the two guys that are doing it, they are very knowledgeable in Disney and what is going on in the company, what's happened in the company, and so I just find it really kind of good to learn what's happening, what has happened from people who are very knowledgeable and know what they're talking about. And if you've seen my videos before, you know I love Disney. I love going to Walt Disney World. So what I like about this podcast in particular is that they kind of talk about all the upcoming things that are happening and just things in the past and why things are the way they are. And so I just really enjoy listening to them, and they're very knowledgeable and they work well together. So this is definitely a podcast that lately I've been gravitating towards more. Before I would just kind of listen a little bit here and there, but definitely I have been like religiously listening every time there's a new episode. So I highly recommend this if you love Disney and you want to kind of get all the latest news about the company. Number 4 is a podcast that's called Once Upon a Crime, and this is a true crime podcast, and I really love the true crime stories that they pick, and I really like the way that it's told in this podcast. I just really like it. I like the way they tell the story, and what I find about true crime podcasts is that, for me at least, it's either like you love it or you hate it. It's just about the way the story is told and the person speaking. I really like their voice. I really like the woman's voice that does it, and I just like the story that she tells and in the order that she tells it. It's just, to me, I find interesting, and I can't really explain it. I just like the way the story is told, and her voice is just very like neutral, and it's just like she gets right to the point, and she throws a little like jokes here and there, and it's just something that it's just one of those podcasts that I found very early on, and I've been an avid listener since then. So yeah, I really highly recommend Once Upon a Crime if you are into true crime. So number 3 is again another true crime podcast, and it's called Criminal, and the woman who voices this podcast, Phoebe Judge, she, I believe, is or definitely was a journalist, so that really helps in this podcast. That's really, I just find that like it really helps. Like, she tells the story and just goes into just a lot of detail that you wouldn't necessarily know, but it's because of her background. And again, I like the way she tells the story. I like the events in the way that it's told. I like the way she tells this story, and I just find Criminal very fascinating, very interesting, and it's one that I go back and listen to old episodes that I have listened to already. Again, true crime, highly recommend Criminal. Number 2 is another Disney one, and this one is called Disney World A to Z, and this podcast is actually by a fellow YouTuber, Emma, who her channel is called The Bookish Princess. I really like her videos. I've been watching her for years. She makes Disney related videos and also book related videos, and I especially love her Disney videos. And so when I found out that she was making a podcast, I had to listen to it, and I really like it. Again, Emma is very knowledgeable in like Disney things and Disney World news, and you know, she will have like a guest on sometimes, her mom or her brother, who again are also knowledgeable in things going on in Disney. And it's really, what I like about Disney podcasts is that it's nice to get your like Disney news and find out what's going on, and you know, all of that, and just tips and tricks. So with this podcast, different to the Disney Dish, I feel like they do more news and just kind of information about Disney in general, whereas this podcast, Walt Disney World A to Z, she focuses more on just Walt Disney World rather than the parks, the rest of the parks. But she does a lot of like tips and tricks on like fast passes and things, and her family's been going to Disney for years, and so it's really nice to get that perspective from someone who has been going throughout the years and just knows a lot of tips and tricks that maybe I don't even know, even though I've gone a lot. Also, what I like about this podcast is that Emma has had on people who, like as guests, who have done other things besides Disney World. She had someone on who, you know, went to Disneyland Paris and did the review of that trip, and then someone who did a Disney cruise and their review of the trip. And I just find that very interesting because, especially as someone who has only been to Disney World, it's nice to hear about like the other parks, especially like the other parks outside of the US that I've never been to. So I really like that about this podcast. And again, if you love Disney, I highly recommend Disney World A to Z. Also, you could check out Emma's channel. She's called The Bookist Princess again, so I definitely recommend that one. So my number one favorite podcast is My Favorite Murder, and I've mentioned this quite a few times on different favorite videos, and if you haven't seen any of those, this podcast it's called My Favorite Murder, and it's by Georgia Hardstark and Karen Kilgariff. It's just really great. It's a true crime podcast, obviously, but Georgia and Karen are just two very funny people, and the way they tell these true crime stories, they tell it with humor, but not degrading the story in any way. It's just, I feel like it helps bring light to a topic that is very dark. So I really love this podcast. It's just so funny, and every time that a new episode is uploaded, that is the first one that I listen to. You know, every like Monday and Thursday when the episodes come out, I'm like constantly refreshing my podcast app to see when they uploaded, like when they upload. I just really love this podcast. I can't get enough of it. I listen to old episodes constantly. It's just a great podcast. Again, I love the way they tell the story. So with this one in particular, they each tell a true crime story. So first it'll be either Karen or Georgia, and then second it'll be the other one. And so you get two true crime stories within the one podcast, and then they also have another episode that they upload on Mondays. That one's on Thursdays. On Mondays they do what they call a mini-sode, and people write in and tell their personal true crime related stories, and they read them, and I just love it. They are so funny, and they do go on tour, and I've been dying to see them on tour. Unfortunately, I missed the last time they were in New York. I was a little too late with getting tickets, and so I couldn't. So hopefully they come back soon, because I want to see them live so bad. But they upload their live episodes, which is really cool, because it's nice as someone who hasn't been able to see them live. It's really nice to like hear it. Again, My Favorite Murder, obsessed. I talk about it all the time. Every time I mention podcast or I talk about podcasts with someone, I mentioned My Favorite Murder. I've gotten a few of my coworkers to listen to it, and it's just so great. And if you don't listen to any podcast on this list but one, please let it be My Favorite Murder, because it's just so good. And so I have three kind of like honorable mentions in this video. I do love these three podcasts, and there are more podcasts that I have listened to, but these are just my favorites and the ones I feel like are worth mentioning, like my go-tos. These three didn't make like the top 5, but they're still the ones that I like impatiently wait for episodes for. So the first one we're going to talk about is This Is Love, and it is made by the same person who does Criminal, but they're kind of like two very opposite podcasts. Like Criminal is about, you know, true crime and murder and all that. but This Love is just about love. It's the different stories of love and different types of love. It's just a very like interesting, and some of the stories are just so like heartwarming and just so nice, and some things like it makes you think, and I just really like it. Again, it all ties back into Phoebe Judge and her background in journalism. I really like this podcast, so if you're looking for something on a lighter note, I recommend This Is Love. So the next one I'm going to talk about is called Imagined Life, and this podcast is so interesting. Someone tells a story of someone famous about their life, and the whole time you have no idea who they're talking about. They only tell you at the end, and so the entire time you're listening to this, you're picking up little clues and little hints, and you're piecing them together to try and figure out who this person is. And there are times that I have gotten it really quickly. There are times that I had no clue until the end, and there are times where it was on the tip of my tongue and I should have known, but I didn't until like it was like too late. But this podcast is so interesting. Again, it's more lighter, but it's really fascinating to learn about these people's lives, because some of them are people that you would have no clue what they've been through, what, you know, their whole life is about, and it's just a way to learn more about like people that you see on TV every day. So that one is just so interesting. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is another true crime one, and it's called Colts. This one is just like kind of the other ones where it tells a story about a like true crime type of thing, but this one is just all about different cults, and they split it up into 2 episodes. So one week, half of the episode kind of like the background of the cult and the leader is uploaded, and then the next week it's kind of a continuation of part 2, just about like how the cults, like just more about the cults. The first is kind of like the history of why the cult is the way it is, and then the second part is just kind of like about the cult and how it ended or where it is today. And it's just so interesting. Like, again, I love true crime, and I just find cults very interesting, and just the fact that like I cannot fathom how anyone creates a cult, how anyone joins a cult. And with this, it's like you kind of get in the mindset and you kind of learn the psychology behind things. I find it very interesting. It's just the way they tell the story too is good. I like the way they do it. They also have another one called Serial Killer, which is basically the same thing, just about serial killers, but I prefer cults. I really like it, and again, if you're a true crime fan, I highly recommend this one. So those were all of my favorite podcasts that I listen to basically every day. I have a bus ride to work, so I have a long commute, and these podcasts, I feel like it's just nice to listen to. It makes the time go by faster, and I just really like it. It's something different from music. Again, the names of each podcast that I mentioned will be listed down below, so you can find them if you are curious. So like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you so much for watching.